Couple of videos ago, I did a review of various pitch decks and went through them to show you what I thought was good about them and what was not so good. Now, as a reminder, those pitch decks were not the exact pitch decks that Airbnb had used or that Uber had used. It was someone's take on their pitch deck. And frankly, they had not done a very good job. The Airbnb version was a lot better than the Uber version, which was all over the place. And it got me thinking, and I had a few questions about pitch decks in general. And one of the most common questions recently has been, do you need a graphic designer for your pitch deck? Is that something that you should think about? Should you hire someone to put a spin on your pitch deck design so that it is more appealing? And my answer is no, you don't need someone to do your pitch deck design for you, not from a graphic designer standpoint. If you take a look at some of the even more commonly known startups that are out there that have gone on to successfully raise lots of money, they have pretty basic pitch decks. When you go through the slides, you'll see, and I'm going to do a review of some of those here in a second, they're not that fancy. They're using regular imagery and some text, nothing that, really requires a graphic designer to come in and spiff something up. There is something that you do need, and I'm going to talk about that right after I go through some of these examples. So this is supposed to be an example of LinkedIn's pitch deck that was used for, you'll see right here, their Series B all the way back in 2004. So they had raised their seed money. They had even raised a seed round, an A round with investors. This was for their follow-on B round that they raised with investors. And this example is actually 37 slides long. So when you get to this stage of fundraising, there's a lot more information investors want to see, a lot more updates that they're going to want to see from you. But the point of this that I want you to see is that most of the work in here is something that someone who just has basic understanding of PowerPoint can do. It doesn't really take a graphic designer to do this type of work. And I'm going to move through them pretty quickly rather than spend time reviewing too much of it. Basic text, couple of not even images. These are just shapes that have been inserted, right? And granted, this is from 2004. Technology wasn't as fancy, but my point is you don't need to be successful when you're raising money with investors. The idea is to be concise and tell the story of your startup, but you don't have to have these fancy pitch decks that blow people away. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I lean against that is from a technological standpoint. If your computer lags trying to load heavy imagery or videos and things like that, it's going to make you look bad in the investor's eyes. Again, this is just text that LinkedIn used back then. Just a few shapes, those kinds of things, nothing too fancy. This is a screenshot clearly from their service that has been added. So it's not like they had to create this in PowerPoint. This was just a screenshot. They are using some color to call things out, a simple graph, nothing too fancy you need to do there. So you can see there's nothing that fancy in this pitch deck, and yet they went on to raise a very successful B round for the business. So let's take a look at a couple others. Now here's Mint. If you don't know what Mint is, Mint was bought by Intuit, which owns QuickBooks, and this is a money management system. And you'll see a little bit more imagery here, right? I mean, this is another screenshot from the solution at the time. And again, this one's probably old too, but I think the point that I'm wanting you to grasp is there's nothing that fancy here. I mean, these arrows are shapes that you can easily insert when you're using PowerPoint or Keynote on a Mac. Nothing too crazy. A nice comparison here from a matrix perspective. But again, this is just a table that got inserted. This is none of this took a graphic designer to do this information. These are just graphs. I know they might look a little more fancy, this revenue by source here, but this is just graphs. These are just graphs that were inserted using PowerPoint. Okay. So, I mean, here we're looking at a plain black and white screen, plain text, nothing fancy about it, guys. This is smart art that can be inserted using PowerPoint. Let's take a look at one more. I don't know MapMe, so I'm not going to use them. Let's grab Moz. And if you don't know Moz, they're a SEO company, right? And Rand Fishkin's a pretty well-known entrepreneur out there. This is from 2011, 36 slides. Apparently this was for their Series B as well. And if you look at this, the claims that they raised 18 million using it. Okay. A timeline, right? Nothing too crazy, folks. I mean, a lot of these slides are just one statement and some text to drive home the point. Some graphs. So that all can be inserted using PowerPoint. I don't see anything in here coming from a marketing company that is really fancy or that took a graphic designer to do. So I hope you get the point that a graphic designer is not necessarily something you need to spend money on from a startup perspective when you're designing your pitch deck. Obviously, you want it to be attractive enough and to design it such that the pitch deck makes sense, doesn't get overly cluttered. But I think that's something that you can do as a founder yourself. Now, what I might recommend is that you consider getting a presentation designer. It's a little bit of semantics, but it's a lot different. A graphic designer is going to work on the imagery and the text and colors and those types of things. But a presentation designer is someone that can work with you to make sure that the flow of your presentation of your deck makes sense. Again, go back a couple of videos ago and look at my review of the Uber sample pitch deck that someone had put together, and you'll see that they clearly didn't use a presentation designer because they were all over the place with the slides they used, and they were going back and forth between topics and things like that. So in lieu of getting a graphic designer, if you're going to spend money to work with someone to improve your pitch deck, if you're not very seasoned at writing a pitch deck or designing a pitch deck from the perspective of telling the story that you need to and answering the questions that investors are going to be intrigued about, then it might make sense to hire a presentation designer to help spiff it up. In that case, you still can do some of the grunt work yourself. Go ahead and start to work through the slides. It's a really good exercise because it'll make you think through how you answer various things, and do as much of the work as you can, and then hand it off to someone and let them make suggestions and do a review of what you've designed so that it is better storytelling material when you're presenting to investors. So again, I don't recommend hiring a graphic designer, but a presentation designer is a whole other story. If you don't have the experience to tell your story from a pitch deck perspective, if it's confusing to you how to put one together in the first place, then it may make sense to spend a few $100s, do as much of the work as you can, and then hand it off to someone who can prove it so you have a better chance of landing capital. Hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I look forward to talking to you again. See you later.